So, thank you for the warm welcome. And I actually was thinking about how do I introduce myself. Especially after the previous presentation, I guess I have to really think about the introduction. What you've heard so far is a part of my life, and probably that part of my life was ended around the late 90s or maybe the early 2000s, after which I set up a school. So that's something that some of you know and maybe some of you don't. A school called Shishuvan in Mumbai. Complete labor of love from the beginning, nail on the wall to the governing board deciding how the entire thing was going to work. And for me, that was the biggest journey of discovery, or the self-discovery or understanding of what a school would be. So I talk with you today not as somebody who's an expert in the field or a person from a development agency. I stand before you as somebody who has been a leader of a school or a person who set up a school. Ran it for a good 12 years with the understanding from the beginning that I would be leaving it. Because for me, what was important was to discover whether a school such as Shishuvan could even exist. So let me introduce you as a person who, if you were to look at me in terms of a North Indian woman, and therefore disempowered from the beginning, because women in North India are not supposed to speak or go out and live their own lives, largely, weren't supposed to. And remember, I come from a white-haired generation that tells you I've lived a long time. From a family that was very conservative, that said, you should be a banker. That's a very reasonable profession for a person who was going to take the arts. So I was not even remotely connected with commerce, who then left her family to set out on her own and was told, we are cutting you off, as a way of getting me back. And then lived with 50 paisa in my pocket for a couple of years to be able to survive, and survived. So I'm a survivor. I'm a survivor, a person who said, can I do things the way that I want to? And so my biggest value is independence. And so, in some sense, I think what I bring to the table, whether it's a school, whether it's Adhyayan, is actually a way of becoming independent. So the school was a way of helping a whole bunch of people, teachers, parents, students, to become independent, and Adhyayan is a way of extending that to the whole fraternity. So to all my fellow school people, whoever they are, this is what we bring to the table. And then, of course, the funny thing is that here is this lowest on the ladder of power, a woman from a space of that kind that I just spoke to you, who meets white man should be on the top of the ladder, right? A white man from UK, developed country, who's supposed to be, if you look at the chain of power, is one of the people on the top. But then what happens with what I think you've just heard in the previous presentation, when you talk to somebody and you discover that person, you discover he's the son of an Irish immigrant to the UK, whose mother tells me, and she's 103 years old, and now my mother-in-law, that when she came to the UK as a 14-year-old from Ireland, the first thing that she saw was on a pub door, dogs and Irish not allowed. And I thought, well, guess what? That's our narrative. And that's the narrative of all of these African Americans, and it's the narrative of a whole lot of other people who are, immigrants and disenfranchised. And that's when you begin to connect, So I'd like to introduce to you Spokey Wheeler. He calls himself a serial headmaster. And perhaps what we will together, because we are both co-founders of Adhyayan as well as life partners, we bring to you, and I pulled him on because he's in town, unlikely to happen. We sort of meet each other at airports and railway stations more than anywhere else. But basically, I pulled him in to say, we both have to tell the story together. And so to start, I'd like to invite Spooky to do a small activity with you so that you begin to think about what we started with.
So I think it's good afternoon. Over yesterday and then this morning, you've had the opportunity to listen and to reflect on ideas, issues, activities, which you might think, I wouldn't mind taking one of those things back to my own school. And so what we'd like you to do now is just to think of one thing that's come up over the last day and morning, which you think is significant enough to want to introduce, to extend, to expand, to embed that which you do in your own school to improve the lives and learning of children. We'd like you to reflect on that for a moment, remembering that your standard 10 students today will be about 46 or 47 in the year 2049. It is predicted in 2049 there will be a $1,000 computer which will be capable of the computational capacity of the entire human species. And so when we reflect now, it's about how do we want our schools to be and what do we want them to do. So just think for a moment of one thing that you think, yes, I would like to take this forward into my school. Reflect on it, tell your neighbor, and then ask yourself the question, what barriers might be in my way to enable me to achieve that? If you understand the question, could you put your thumb in the air? If you are uncertain of the question, can you wobble your hand? If you really are not sure and don't understand, put your thumb down. And could you do it now, please? Okay, that looks like affirmation. So we'll give you just a couple of minutes to be able to reflect on that question and reflect on what barriers you might experience in taking that next step in your school. Thank you. Please begin. On the principle that we are beginning rather than ending a conversation, what we'd like is if one person from each table could tell us not what it is that you want to take forward, but to identify in a single word or phrase a barrier. Are we clear? Can I see the thumbs, please? Thank you very much indeed.
Very good morning. Good afternoon. So my name is Amarnath. One of the only things which our team here, we were able to reflect was very interesting and very powerful thought which came in today in the morning. Thanks to sir. How do you enable every child to think that the world is full of opportunities? There is no dearth of opportunities. So barriers, teacher's mindset, the ecosystem, the management's mindset to understand what the problem can be. How do they let go everything in the past of the traditional thought process to change and say, I would take the first step to make a child think I can confidently deliver this?
I'll just mention the barrier. We had the mindset. Another one was expertise.
Well, I feel communication. The right kind of communication is a barrier. That's what I feel.
I feel that in India, the number of students per class being so large in many schools is the, a limitation for the teacher, I think, to be able to address the needs of each and every child.
I think valuing teachers in the right way and also creating a culture of learning by valuing teachers, I think, is really important.
I think the number of schools coming up every year, there has to be some kind of standardization. There has to be some values, some rules. Not that every year so many schools and then we discuss only numbers and numbers in the meetings. Thank you so much.
The two barriers would be, the first one would be the distractions that exist today for children and the fear of being left behind, which is the fear in the mind of parents and teenagers.
I didn't get the first one.
The distractions in the society.
We as a team go with the first one, a closed mindset. Once we are able to address the mindset, a lot of other barriers also will dissolve.
Since today I'm not directly part of the teaching learning process, but I choose to embed peace education into the curriculum and into the teaching learning process. The barrier that I envisage is no time, which is again could be a mental model, and maybe teachers' lack of competencies to implement the same.
Well, I had a conversation with Mr. Gautama during the tea break. And I approached him with a lot of barriers in my mind. And he said, all the barriers lie there in your mind. You just have to say, clear the way, sir, and just move ahead. So I'm going with that thought. Thank you.
We feel that getting parents on board with us so that we can be a team and work for the child. So getting parents on board would be a barrier we feel we'll face.
The barrier we thought about was whether we can be consistent with what we're doing, the change that we want to make.
Well, I'm not an educator, but I coach a lot of children. So one of the biggest things which I see as a barrier is when there is a shortcoming of a child, who's going to take the ownership and responsibility of that shortcoming? So definitely, like ma'am said, about getting the parents on the board and being on the same page about solving that barrier together. Thank you.
Okay, so there are a couple of barriers that have come up on our table. One is, in the previous session, we heard about fragmentation of values, where the person has to be a different person at home, different person at school. So is that really a good thing? So that's one barrier. How do you document best practices that you're doing in your school? Also, the school's legal work, which they have to present to the education department and all those kinds of things. And there was one more.
I think what is missing in our education system today, and I see it from whatever little experience I've had in education, is the happiness quotient in the schools. And I think the biggest barrier to that is, which British left us with, is conditioned minds. Parents have a certain way of thinking, teachers have a certain way of thinking, and unfortunately that's not how our country's traditional educational system was. So that's one barrier which I see, and if we overcome that barrier, then I think we can have a beautiful blend of traditional educational system with modernity. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Rather than apologizing for my ancestors, I guess I would say I think I've learned something really significant, which India and the UK, and I slightly separate Ireland from England, but only a little, because I had an English father as well as an Irish mother. When I was at school, I learned to row, and then as my extracurricular activity became the captain of rowing. I used to think it was a peculiarly English tradition to look backwards whilst moving forwards. But actually, I now see it as an enormous virtue. Our ability to reflect on what has been in order for us to take those next steps. So while we've just looked at problems, could you now just reflect, maybe over the last 2, 3, 4 years, one thing in your school that you have introduced or developed of which you are truly proud? It can be a very small thing. It doesn't have to be a large thing. And what was one of the key levers in making it possible? What was it that allowed you to achieve whatever it was, to create whatever it was, which without it would not have happened? So now it's to reflect on yourself. And I like the fact, unusually, we spend very little time in classrooms asking children to think. And so the ability to think first and then to begin to answer seems to us to be appropriate. So one thing of which you are proud, and what was it? One of those key things that helped that to have life breathed into it. If we're clear, can we put our thumbs in the air, please? Thank you very much indeed.
Building a robust staff culture, and what made this possible was listening and paying attention to the quality of invitations, the structures of invitations.
For us, it was bring change in yourself, start with me, and then you can take it further to the students. So bring change in yourself first, or being open-minded, you bring the openness in yourself, and then bring it to the society or in the school or wherever you want.
All for us, it was teamwork where management, teachers, children, all on one common goal. So what worked for us was teamwork.
Good afternoon, everybody.
What we discussed was what worked was being able to communicate your idea, your thought to everyone, whether it was parents or teachers or all the stakeholders in the... So communication.
For us, it was digitalizing the educational content of the school, like the lesson plans and all, making it easily available on the mobile phones of the staff so that they can be better prepared and having content at their hands 24/7.
So for us, it was basically to give them a space where they can have freedom of open conversations, which can, be fearless, and they can speak out their mind.
Hi. For us, it was having a 360-degree feedback and that ability to respond, to make the system malleable enough to respond to those feedback positively.
For us, it was about teachers seeing themselves as facilitators in the classroom rather than leading it all the time. So for them to facilitate the classroom and letting the students drive the inquiry in an authentic way.
For our AVM group of schools, we started a technique called NBLP, which we started as a pilot project in the primary section, where in the last 1 hour, the children are divided into various groups, where it can be enriching language, it can be mathematical, it can be just emotional intelligence. We tried it as a pilot plan in one class. We found it worked out very well. And then we started off with all the other classes also. So it was a trial first, and then confidence of having won over it. And so now implementing all the primary sections.
For me, it was convincing the parents and the children that the changes that were brought about were right for them.
For us, it was hand-holding and mentoring the teachers while work was in progress.
For me, it was faculty owning the change and passionately taking it inside the classroom.
For us, it was developing a robust and good listening systems, both active and passive. We have given it some names like we have bubble time, we have quality circle time, through which between all the stakeholders, right from top management to principals, vice principals, to children, teachers, any component can talk to each other and basically endeavor an effort to build a very good listening system in school. Thank you.
I think I worked on a very small thing, but very important. And that was a happiness quotient of the school. And even my little ones, the play group, nursery, 2.5, 3 years, the question when we ask after the assembly or in the corridors or in the classroom, how are you? So the answer is not fine or good, it's happy. So even my 2.5 years old play group, they all come and give a hug. They just come reach my knees or maybe below that. And even with their fingers, they point out and they say happy. And that gives you enough energy for the entire day when your entire school is reflecting happiness. Your children are happy. Your teachers are answering the same thing. How are you? How are you, ma'am? It's happy. Your parents, your community. And that is how the circle goes on. And I was very surprised, very happy when very recently I found Finland is the only country which is working on the happiness quotient of the child and the school. And I'm going to develop that for my school, my research.
So I'm delighted to say that Adhyayan is already looking at the happiness quotient, and we now have quite a lot of data on how happy schools are.
Yes, thank you.
Kavita.
Here's your enablers. Okay. If you go to a school, how likely are you to listen to people talking about these? How likely are you to listen to people talking about these? The barriers. Right? So I think there's recently been a little video of a child going around on WhatsApp, which you must have all seen, where he says, "What do you practice?" How many have seen that? Brilliant. So you know that's what you practice. This is what we practice very well. Okay? And when we talk about a mind that's kind of conditioned, for whoever we blame for the conditioning, the point is we're practicing the conditioning better and better till we are really practiced and fantastic at saying can't be done because of all these problems. Yeah? The bit that we don't practice really is the enablers. And if we were to think about why, it's because there are no structures available for that to happen. So this is what I think the school looks like when you have that barrier culture that we call. Everybody looks like, and I'm sorry my sharks are not so nice, but pretty much every stakeholder looks like a shark out to attack the school. Yeah, like piranhas. They are like, I think that's what the school leaders would look at them and say they're like piranhas. They're out to get me. And there is this entire sense that whether it's students who are demanding something, or parents, or the whole governance, whether it's the government, whether it's the management, everybody is seen as attacking in some sense. And so there's a great vulnerability. In fact, I think today, because of safety, because of child protection becoming very much on the agenda, the fear factor has become even more, so bigger than piranhas as well. And I think the question for us is, do we really want our schools to look like this? Or do we want it to look like this? And I think for me, the journey began a long time ago when I started understanding what does a good school look like. And I did visit Rishi Valley, where Shailesh was the principal at that time. I visited Blue Mountain, Mirambika, Center for Learning with Kabir. And I began to look at what is it that a good school is about, apart from having done research on what is considered good in the rest of the world. And that's when I really meet Spokey is at a time when I have set up what I think is a good school. And then he asks me this fundamental question. He said, how do you know how good your school is? And how do you know that your children are truly engaged in their learning, whatever you've tried to do? And I realized that while I seem to have been going around my school, walking into every single class, I had a fairly good idea, but the rest of my school did not know what I knew. And so I was putting myself in that space of, as we heard just now, a leader. And asking myself that question, why is it that I know so much about my school, but the rest of my school doesn't know as much as I know about my school? Yeah. So, knowing yourself as a school is the whole question. How? Are there tools and processes that we can bring in for that? And so, what Spokey had, and he worked with his colleagues in the UK, was to create a research-based diagnostic which would be supported in a way that would support schools to be able to understand themselves. Because all of us don't think the same way. All of us are not into sitting together to simply say, let's get the whole school together and just think about what's happening. Maybe some of us need that structure for creating that thought process in the first place. And if we are going to be able to do that, we need some sort of a tool and a structure. I think you just heard, are the tools working for you, or are you working for the tools? Well, so we needed a tool to work for us, right? And it had to be generic. So it had to be, what does Krishnamurti school think of as good? What does Waldorf school think of as good? What does maybe Aurobindo school think of as good? What does a school anywhere in the world think of as good? So if we were to distill that, and suppose you say all schools that are good are thinking about self-awareness as being one of the essential features, then that becomes a generic thing of asking yourself, how good is my school at knowing itself, right? So it had to be something that could be used by everybody. It had to be something collaborative, inclusive, and led by yourself. Because, as I said before, for me, independence of thought, of being able to work in a way that says, let the world say what it does, but what do I think about this, has to be something that the school as an institution, as a learning organization, sits down and says for itself. So the idea of doing this was for what? It was to bring to the attention of the school, why does it even exist? And what I find quite remarkable is that in all of these years, 30 years and more of being in education in an active way, of working to set up a school or set up an organization, I have asked a lot of people, why do you have a school? And I've had people tell me things like, well, my grandfather set it up, and I've inherited it. It was set up by this trust, and I'm working in it. But very few people will tell you why that school exists. Why am I running a school? What is different between running a school and running a corporation? What's different between running a school and running a business? It's hugely different. So if we are able to even ask ourselves that question, we need a structure for that, right? A structure in which the most disempowered people in our school. And who is the most disempowered person in your school? It's your student. So how do we make it possible for the teacher, the student, the people at the bottom of that chain to be part of the thinking process? So what we created was a diagnostic that was generic, research-based, as I said, not just research that was about what happens in this country, but research across countries. We said if we want to stand as what is best practice in terms of thinking, of thought, then we need to look at the kind of research, and you can see the amount of time we would have spent really deeply understanding what people are saying across the world. So given that this is what we did, we then distilled this into 6 areas. We said this is what largely people are talking about. And if a school is able to sit down and look at itself across these 6 areas, that's when it begins to say, okay, this is my big picture of what my school has in it. And so there's a scaffolding that we created in which who sits down to think about it? It's a team of people representing all your stakeholders. So there are students, teachers, school leaders, managements, alumni, support staff, everybody who is represented in that team that gets together, you identify your team, and then you sit together to ask yourself the questions and to say, what is it that we can see as evidence that we are actually doing what we say? And not just that we've said something, so we are doing it, but how do we know that we're doing it? The self-review essentially works like this. For those of you who are interested, I'll give you a quick snapshot. Okay? So you decide as a school the level of support that you want for doing the review. It could be something that you say, I'll do myself entirely. I don't need Adhyayan at all. You tell me what what's my diagnostic, who are the people involved, what are the processes I'm supposed to follow, and I will simply do it myself. Or you could say, I want to make sure that I'm doing this in a way that's meant to be done, really collaboratively. So can you come in and be a part of my process by being an observer and do it collaboratively with me? Or you could say, can you come in and sort of check whether the evidence we've collected is valid? You can ask for the level of support that you want, and you will get it. Yeah? And it's entirely in your hands. You then create your team, the self-review team. You do a course on how the review is to be conducted, the 4 methods of collecting evidence, how you're supposed to put it into the software. You get your user ID and password. You download the diagnostic. You have access to it anywhere in the country. You gather the evidence together. So the entire team goes out into the school. We've had, for the first time, somebody who's been normally a gate man, somebody who sits at the gate of your school, who's been pulled in to be part of the self-review team, who's told us, I've worked in this school for 25 years. This is the first time I've been in a class to observe what happens. We've had children saying, the teacher was wondering what I'm doing in her class when I went in to observe the class. And we've had absolutely amazed parents who've said, we didn't realize it takes so much to run a school, my God. So everyone has, whatever the team composition, it's left entirely up to you. You don't have to follow that each stakeholder is represented. But whenever we have seen, I think another thing that we were asked is, well, which kind of parents should we take? The guys who are supportive or the ones who are extremely antagonistic? And we said, which ones do you want to take? And we found that people who, there were very interesting situations where a person who was very antagonistic to the school was pulled in to be part of the school review team, came out completely supportive at the end of it, saying, I get it, I realize I'm thinking differently. Now I know differently. So you assess your school's performance on the 6 areas that we showed you. You feed it into the software so that you've got a documentation of where you are at that moment in time. You download the report card, which is a part of the software, so it's something that you get, which gives you data. And I'll talk about why that data is useful for you. You also get a set of recommendations to take you forward if you'd like. If you don't have to take them. So at every point in time, we are saying, you're the boss, you run this. Your team decides, not us. Okay, we've made this possible for you because we want to support you in being able to do this. You decide your course of action after that based on the data, and that's something you decide together. So everybody in the team sits down and says, okay, now that we know where we are, what do we want to do about this? How do we want to take it forward? And that includes the students, and it includes your support staff and everybody who you've put on your team. You then devise your improvement plans, you feedback on the progress so that everybody knows that whatever they did, that hard work they did of gathering the evidence, is actually happening, and then you repeat this annually as an exercise, like you have your sports day or your cultural day or whatever, right? And the idea of this, as I said before, is to give you the scaffold to be able to start practicing this. Now, where you take it from here is really up to you. It's not something we prescribe. It's not something that we create. Beyond this, we've really sat back and said, all we can do is take a look at the data that's put down by different schools and analyze it, feed it back to you saying, you're not alone. Across these schools that have done this, these are the trends. If you want to visit a school that's doing really well in something that you're not sure about, yes, that's possible. If you want to find out a practice that you're really struggling with, we'll put you in touch with someone who's doing that with great ease. Let's use each other to be able to learn. And that's what we offered. So when we started with this, people said nobody's going to take it, by the way. There was an absolute conviction that nobody will be interested in this at all. I'm not surprised that today we are 387 schools down the road of nobody. And all these nobodies are interested in and giving us feedback on things like, well, we discovered in our self-review that we don't give any time for children during the breaks to even go out and play because we're so scared that they will do something that's going to hurt somebody and then we'll be in trouble. And after the review, we have actually decided that that's a policy that we want to change, and now all the children go out in the break. And all the children are now saying, hey, you know what, Adhyayan works. So it works because it helps you to reflect on what are you doing, how are you doing it well, which bits do you want to change, and how do you want to keep innovating. So that's yesterday you heard about how much do you keep the same, how much do you keep changing, and that's in your hands to be able to decide the balance. Yeah? It's also like for those of you who are interested, because everybody who does the review then also comes on board onto our assessor pool, who then helps schools that say we want more support. So if you are a school anywhere in the country and there's a school near you saying we want support, we ask you to provide it. Yeah? So as a result, you get a chance to travel to the most amazing places. As you can see, I've put out a little advertisement saying you can get to Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh, Assam. You want to go anywhere? Come with us. Okay, so I don't know if anybody has questions at this point. Do put it down. Should I stop here to say what these schools are? Should I just continue? I mean, would you like a moment to reflect and put on a question if you want? Or should we just finish this and then you want to do questions? What's preferable? Finish it? Okay. So the profile of the partner schools, this is not something that only the schools which are very expensive have picked up, nor is it something that the schools which are absolutely poverty-stricken have picked up. As you can see, these are largely 295 schools are the ones who charge 1,000 rupees a month or less. But 91 schools are those who, some of whom are charging up to $1.5 lakh a month. And so the same diagnostic is used by everybody, and it's a very important thing for us to tell you this. Because for us, this is what is important. The sharing does not happen with only like schools. You can learn more from unlike schools than you learn from like schools. The variability within your schools is very similar if you're like schools. Whereas when you look at schools which are very different from you and you learn from them, that's when remarkable things happen. I've had a room full of school leaders who've sat from the IB to the state board. So IGCSE, CBSE, ICSE, and state board and government school leaders in the same room talking about safety. Where one school said, I've put in fire alarms in each of my classrooms because I have the money. And another school saying, I don't know where to take my children to, put them in the grounds when the fire alarm rings because I don't have grounds. So where do my children? And that's when the discussion that took place went to a place where that principal who said, I don't have grounds, well, the suggestion that came from the discussion was, can you talk to the buildings around you and speak to the building societies? See how you can work it out so that two classes can go to each of those buildings so that you have a safe space for your children. And that's a suggestion that the school leader, hadn't thought about, right? So this is where the power of being able to sit down together and say, how do we solve these problems together? How do we make enablers? How do we make each other into enablers and problem solvers? That's what begins to happen. And for me, the interesting thing about this is when we look at trends, or we look at the kind of data that we've got, let's look at leadership and management, because this is a room full of people who really are in that space. So you have in the schools 16% that have performed really well. What is the meaning of really well? It means that your consistency across the school is very high. Okay? So your consistency of administration and management is really high. Your school starts on time, ends on time. People are, able to be there. The staff shows up. Everybody teaches in class what they're supposed to. There is engagement happening of the teachers and the administration. That's happening. So you can see 16% is high. But 59%, and this includes all schools, 59% show variability. And variability means some really good practices, but others are not showing the same practice. So you might have in the pre-primary a lot of activity-based work because the teachers really believe in it, and by the secondary, it's only didactic lectures, nothing else, right? And the children in the secondary tell you, we are bored out of our minds, and the children in the primary say, we love school. That's variability, right? And then needs attention is where you find that even in the entire school, everybody is saying, this is just not feeling okay. Right through from the pre-primary to the secondary, people are saying, we just don't see the point of being in the school. And it's really difficult for us because we are learning something, we're not going to use it in our lives, we don't see application, parents don't know what's going on, teachers don't feel empowered, leaders don't understand what they're really supposed to do. There is real difficulty. That's 24% of your schools where that's happening. Now, the question isn't about which school is that. We never put this out in the public as to which school that is. The issue is these are schools willing to look at themselves. And can we give them that absolute, applause that they are willing to look at themselves and start their journeys? Schools that we've been told have been in existence for 150 years, we have never looked at ourselves. First time we're doing it. So, what do we find? The first question is, how well is the school led? What you find here is about 9% have very good administration and management. It's the bit about instructional leadership that's very difficult for them. If you look at the efficient management of a school or the culture of a school, again, you find a very different picture, right? So let's open up the one where it's difficult, the leading of the school. You find 3 areas that they've picked up data on, and let's look at what this is. So first, holding people accountable, yourself and your staff accountable, requires you to first articulate what you're holding people accountable to. Not just to give them a little letter saying you are appointed as a teacher, which could mean anything to anybody. The second one is, does the school effectively organize training programs for staff? That's where you see the biggest issue. Because everybody does these staff training programs, which are generic for everyone. All teachers are treated as one teacher, like you have teachers treating all children as one child in the classroom. So what a teacher actually needs, very few schools are interested in finding out. And whether the principal actually provides direction is even harder to locate, right? So what does this mean? What do you think it means? Is there anyone who's willing to look at this and say, what does this actually mean about the quality of attention of a leader? And again, we are saying this is across schools. So look at this as a representative sample of most schools. Yeah?
Not adequate attention to building teacher capacity, and also not building enough participative opportunities for teachers to grow within the school.
I think the leader, basically I would say management needs to draw attention on the leader that she herself requires some training which was lacking. So a scale beyond this.
Okay. Yeah. There.
I think there is no standard operating procedure.
There's no
Six Sigma. There's no anything which you do in the school has to have a very specific way to look at things so that you really measure at every level.
Right.
So that's something.
Right. So whatever we've heard right now is exactly about the relationship between the people who run the school, the people who run the classes, and the people who are part of that system, right? So what is the quality of the relationship between the person who is given the responsibility of running the school and the people who are actually delivering what is considered the mandate of the school, which is education, and the children within the class who are leading their own learning? What is the quality of attention being paid by the teacher to the child and by the person who is responsible for the teacher's professional development to the teacher? What is the quality of attention? How much does the person, the leader, actually know about what's happening inside the classroom? How many of us open the classroom doors regularly to walk in and see what's actually happening inside? Has anyone in this room sat at the back of a class for a whole day, like a child does, and experienced what a child experiences? And how many of us think we'll last out if we do that? So anybody who wants to go back and take one action, I'd suggest sit in the classroom, for a whole day. That's the experience your child is having in the school. And then think about what you want to do. Yeah? Anybody willing to do that? Brave enough? Yeah? All right, that's great.
Make sure you have very good sleep the night before.
So now this kind of information is, if you see what happens is this is given, the people given access to this information are the people who are part of the network that we have created, where then they can think about what's to be done for the capacity or the professional development of the leadership, of the teachers, of the students, and this is how the school starts innovating or taking a step forward. So what we have discovered is really this. We talk about violence of decision-making, violence of being leaders. And it's largely because the tendency all of us have is to say, I know better, I know best, I know more. And instead of saying, because I know more, how do I make sure everybody else knows as much so that we can make a decision together? The tendency we have is to say, I'll sell it to the rest of the school. And that's when, because I am so confident, super confident, that I'm this great leader and I can sell this idea, then I work really hard at selling it to everybody that I can in my school, all my stakeholders. And therefore, my efficacy is very high, and I manage to do it, and then one day I retire or I leave because somebody gives me a much better opportunity. And whatever my school has been doing, what happens to it? It completely gets demolished. Because the next person who comes and says, I know better. I know better, and I know what has to be done, and whatever has been done before, I'm not interested in. I just want to do what I think I can, and so my self-efficacy says I will do it and take it in a different direction. And so the life history of schools, anybody here who's a historian of schools? What does it do? Yeah. So it sort of goes up and then. Right. So would you like to repeat that for the rest of the room?
No, I just said that if there are too many pulls and pressures taking place, the sequence leads to the school actually having no direction in which to go. That is one problem. But the ups and downs that take place in a boarding school, in a residential school, is quite common in India at least, because of the politics that is there in the old student body and in the Board of Governors. So I think you could look at almost any residential school where the old students form the board, which is not owned by anyone. It's a society which is consisting of people who studied in the school. Then this kind of politics unfortunately does occur.
Sure. So you can speak to a lot of people. They'll tell you, हमारे ज़माने में हमारा स्कूल बहुत अच्छा हुआ करता था. अब ना ठीक नहीं हो रहा है वहाँ पे जो भी हो रहा है. And this attitude, you'll talk to most people, that's the way they see the whole school. So somewhere the leader's ability actually debilitates everybody else. Or if you're looking at the ecosystem and somebody else driving the change, whoever it is, right? The same thing happens. Because it's forced down, it's top down. But if you want really this entire country and the world to learn how to collaborate, to be the first one to start. And maybe the decision that your school will make after the review is not going to go in the direction you want. And will you be able to let go of what you really like and really want? And will you be able to support what it is that the school wants? And is that something that you're willing to do? Then you need to take this step and make that happen. So it's really up to you. Like we said, you're independent, and so are we. And independent people together will be able to make something happen because maybe we care more about the world than we care to admit to ourselves. That's my email and my phone number. And I'm open to questions, and so is Spooky, both of us. Taking ownership versus responsibility, yeah.
So most of the time people are taking ownership and hardly they are saying we are responsible.
Yeah. I mean, if we've had the courage to set up something like a school, that's a huge responsibility. Yeah.
That is lacking. Ownership is more.
Yeah, we decide how it's going to be because we are put into that position. And I guess that's true of countries. We make that happen where we give it to the government to run. Right? Yeah.
So the virtuous circle is I have ownership and I embrace my accountability, and we embrace our accountability. It is a common sense of purpose. I think in terms of ownership, there are a number of areas which the work we do is significantly related to international research. One of them, collective teacher efficacy, is very, very powerful. But we think the work that we are doing in a very small way with regard to the ownership of stakeholders is a particularly Indian strategy and one which we haven't seen to this extent in other parts of the world. If we look at those trends, over the last 2.5 decades, external inspection has been moving gradually and now rapidly towards self-review. And the word validation is being used much more because the school owns that, is the one who owns the improvement And as Kavita indicated before, if the school identifies what it wants to get better at, it's going to work at it. If it's told what it needs to do, that's less likely.
We'll take one last question.
It's just a kind of a reflection. Yeah. The schools across have different resource people based on the competencies, right? Now, we have seen schools which has high competency as far as teachers are concerned. They have a different level of consciousness. But the schools who do not have a different level of thought process and the consciousness. So how do you get that into the system? So if you have to go and recommend them to change the resource, it's going to be like,
we don't recommend anything.
Exactly.
We don't recommend anything. It's them who, they decide what to move on. The whole thing is, I think that what we've done is we've sort of said, and I mean, the happiest moment for me was when I heard that the Krishnamurti schools are no longer interested in being islands of excellence, and that they really want to sort of say, I'm opening up a space here for people to come and explore with me. And that's the thing, that somewhere we've kind of been operating in ways that say, and I've heard this about myself, I've often heard somebody saying, you're different, you think differently. And that's actually beginning to sound in my ears like it's a bit of an insult. Because what they're saying really is, I can't be like you, so I'm very happy being where I am, right? And that's the danger. It's dangerous for us to say, Krishnamurti schools can do it, nobody else can. Aurobindo schools can do it, nobody else can. Gandhi could do it, nobody else can. I mean, come on, we've got to stop that. We've got to grow up somewhere, and to stop saying that we are, what we are because of whatever happened to us, but what about the future? At some point, every child has to stop blaming their parents and become responsible for themselves. And at some point, the countries, the schools, whoever it is, has to start saying, I am now going to decide what I want to, and I'm going to take responsibility for what I do. If I take a risk and I fall flat on my face, I'll get up, brush my hands off, and start again. But I can't be staying safe all the time saying, you're different, you're Krishnamurti, you're Aurobindo, come on. When? When is it going to shift? So that's the big, big question for all of us. How do we take the first step? And I realize that most people really hesitate to take that first step because they feel, my teachers are, and another thing is this whole thing of my teachers are not good enough, my country is not good enough, we are not ready yet. In the UK you can do this, in India we are not ready to do it. When will we ever get ready to do it? When will we ever get ready to start thinking? When will we ever get ready to start being clean? Keeping ourselves, in a way that says we can collaborate, caring for each other. When are we going to start? So if the scaffold is required, here it is. Take it. You do what you like with it. If you need help, we're there. And we've gone everywhere. We have slept on bare ground. We have not bothered about whether we have a clean bathroom. What is more important is that school called us. That's it.
I measure my journey on the number of mattresses and the range of mattresses that I have slept on over the last 5 years. I'd just like to reflect, though, that we spent a very long time as societies around the world and as a society in India being more interested in provision and resource than we are in the consequences of the learning experience. Vivian Robinson was one of the researchers that was identified on the screen. She's a New Zealand researcher who did one of the biggest meta-studies in impactfulness of school leaders in the improvement, performance and development of children. And the single activity, which I have to be honest and say, I didn't do enough in my 3 different headships, which had twice as big an effect size as any other, was the promotion and participation in teacher development. We spend our time on sometimes the minutiae of the present, and we don't think enough about how we develop ourselves for the future. And sometimes we believe that resource is the answer. A relatively small number of schools have achieved good in teaching and learning. 2 of them charge less than 1,000 rupees a month. The great teaching, and I guess for us, the leadership and management of teaching and learning, which is something most of us were never trained or developed in, is probably our most significant activity. It is not about the amount of money, it's about the focus, the commitment, and the inspiration.
So I think we decided that, whatever the school can contextualize their findings to themselves. And we found that's true. If you're under a tree and you're a school, it's still about the relationship between the child and the teacher. If you're in an air-conditioned classroom, it's still about the relationship. So really, you contextualize it to your school. You take it from where your school is to wherever you would like and wherever the school would like. But the question really is, how do we start? And we thought this is our offering, and if in the next 10 years we find it bearing fruit, we can die happy. We are both pretty aware that the only truth we faced is we are mortal. We're both going to die. So we said, okay, before we do that, and we're pretty close to it, as you can see, what do we do that'll say at least we've left something behind that's of use and of value? So that's all that we have to say. Your problem. You want to wear a suit? You want to wear a suit and look really smashing and handsome? Your problem. You want to wear a kurta? I'm happy with that as well. Thank you.